My daughter called it a family meeting. That's what she said when she texted me on a Tuesday afternoon in March. "Mom, we'd like to have a family meeting this Saturday. Come at noon, we'll do lunch." I remember reading it twice, then setting my phone face down on the kitchen counter and standing there for a long moment, looking out the window at my backyard. The dogwood tree I planted with my late husband was just starting to bloom. Pink blossoms, the same as every spring. Some things don't change. I wished people were more like that. I knew something was off. 23 years of being someone's mother tells you things that words don't. My name is June. I'm 68 years old. I retired 3 years ago from 31 years of teaching 4th grade at Millbrook Elementary in Asheville, North Carolina. After my husband passed, that was 2019, pancreatic cancer, 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end, I stayed in our house on Clover Ridge Road. 4 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, the dogwood in the back, and a vegetable garden that keeps me busy from April through October. The mortgage has been paid off since 2011. I own every inch of that house. I want you to remember that part. My daughter's name is Lee. She's 41. Her husband is Connor. He works in commercial real estate, or that's what he tells people at parties. What he actually does, from what I've pieced together over the years, is flip distressed properties. Buy low, renovate cheap, sell fast. He's very good at reading what something is worth on paper and very poor at understanding what something is worth to a person. They have 2 children, my grandchildren, Maisie and Owen. I love those 2 more than I can explain. Maisie is 8, and she has her grandfather's eyes. Owen just turned 6 and still asks me to make biscuits every time he comes over. Those kids are the reason I kept my mouth shut as long as I did. I kept thinking, if I say the wrong thing, I lose access to them. That kind of thinking will make you smaller than you should ever let yourself become. I should also tell you about my son, Christopher. He lives in Portland with his wife, Tamsin. Christopher is 44 and has always been, as his teachers used to write on his report cards, emotionally perceptive. He felt things deeply as a boy. He still does. He called me the week after I got that text from Lee and he said, without me saying anything about it, "Mom, are you okay? Something feels off?" I told him I was fine. I wasn't fine, but I wasn't ready to say that yet. Saturday came. I drove the 40 minutes to Lee and Connor's house in Weaverville. They have a newer build, one of those open concept places where everything is gray and white and there are shiplap walls in rooms where shiplap has no business being. I always wipe my feet twice at that door. Not because it's dirty outside, but because that house makes me feel like I'm being evaluated. The lunch was already on the table when I arrived. Deli sandwiches from the Publix down the road, still in the plastic containers. Lee didn't cook. That told me something. This wasn't a real lunch. This was a prop. Connor sat at the head of the table, even though it was not his table. Well, technically it was, but you understand what I mean. He had a yellow legal pad in front of him. I noticed it immediately. Who brings a legal pad to lunch with their mother-in-law? Lee hugged me. It was the kind of hug where the other person's arms don't fully commit. I hugged her back the same way I've hugged difficult parents at school conferences, warm enough to be kind, firm enough to hold my ground. "Where are the kids?" I asked. "At my sister's," Connor said. That was the second thing that told me. They'd sent the children away. We sat down. Nobody ate. Connor clicked his pen 3 times and said, "June, we wanted to talk to you about the house." I put my sandwich down. "Which house?" I said. Not a question. A clarification. "Your house," Lee said, "on Clover Ridge." I looked at my daughter. She was looking at the table. My daughter, who I pushed through 14 hours of labor to bring into this world, who I drove to dance practice every Tuesday for 9 years, who I sat up with at 2 a.m. when she had mono at 16 and was so sick she couldn't lift her head. She was looking at the table. "Okay," I said. "What about it?" Connor cleared his throat. He had clearly rehearsed this part. "We've been looking at the numbers," he said. "The market in Asheville is really strong right now. Properties on Clover Ridge are selling for, well, yours could easily list at $620, maybe $640. $640,000. He said it like he was doing me a favor by knowing that. I'm aware of what my house is worth, I said. The thing is, Lee said. And now she did look up. And I could see she'd been practicing this too. The thing is, Mom, that house is a lot for one person. 4 bedrooms. That yard. The upkeep alone. I manage the upkeep. You're 68. I'm aware of how old I am, Lee. Connor put his hand flat on the legal pad. What Lee is trying to say is that we think it makes more financial sense for you to downsize. Something smaller, lower maintenance. You'd free up significant equity. You could put it in a high-yield account, supplement your retirement. My retirement is supplemented. Your father and I planned carefully. Of course, Connor said. But things change, and we've been doing some research. He actually flipped a page on the legal pad. There's a really nice 55-plus community over in Arden, the Pines at Crest Ridge. Beautiful units, full amenities, very active social scene. The Pines at Crest Ridge. I knew the place. I'd driven by it once. It looked like a very well-landscaped waiting room. I picked up my sandwich. I took a bite. I chewed slowly. I made them sit in the silence. What happens to my house? I said. If I go to the Pines at Crest Ridge. Connor and Lee exchanged a look. That look, the one that they had clearly also rehearsed. Well, Connor said, that's actually something we wanted to discuss. Given the market, and given that we've been looking to expand our space, we thought it might make sense for the family to keep the property. We could buy you out at a fair price, or, alternatively, if you wanted to gift the equity, we could talk to an estate attorney about the tax implications. There it was. He wanted my house, not for me to sell it, for him to have it. I set the sandwich down again. I looked at my daughter. She was looking at the legal pad now. Let me ask you something, I said. I kept my voice very quiet. 31 years in a classroom teaches you that quiet is more powerful than loud. When your father and I bought that house, how old were you? Lee looked up. 12? Do you remember the weekend we moved in? Your dad let you pick the paint color for your room. She was quiet. You picked that lavender purple. I thought it was too dark, but he said let her have it. You still have a photo from that weekend on your phone. You showed it to me at Christmas. She said nothing. That house, I said, is where your father died. It is where I said goodbye to him. It is where I still talk to him sometimes, in the garden, because that's where he liked to sit in the evenings. And you would like me to go live at the Pines at Crest Ridge so that Connor can flip it. That's not, Lee started. Is that what this is? Connor put his pen down. June. We have real financial pressures. The market has been difficult. We have the kids' schools, the mortgage here. Those are your choices, Connor. They are not my obligation. I stood up. I picked up my purse. I'm going home, I said, to my house, and I'd like you both to think very carefully before you bring this up again. I drove home. I did not cry until I got to the driveway. Then I sat in the car for 10 minutes and cried until I was done. And then I went inside and called Christopher. He answered on the second ring. I told him everything. He was quiet through most of it. When I finished, he said, Mom, how long has this been building? I don't know. A while, I think. I've been noticing small things. What kind of small things? I thought about it. The comments over the last year or so that had accumulated like sediment. Mom, this kitchen is really dated. Mom, the stairs must be getting hard with your knee. Mom, have you thought about what happens if you fall? Lee mentioning twice that Connor knew a great estate attorney. The way Connor once walked through my living room with that particular look men get when they're appraising something, the kind of small things you dismiss individually, I said, but that make a pattern when you look at them together. Christopher said, I'm coming home. You don't have to do that, Mom. His voice was steady. I'm coming home. He arrived the following Friday. He brought Tamsin, which I was glad for. Tamsin is a nurse practitioner with a very precise and practical way of looking at problems, and I needed that right then. We sat at my kitchen table. The actual kitchen table. The one with the water ring from 1998 that I never bothered to refinect because it was from a potted plant that Christopher brought me for Mother's Day, and I told them everything from the beginning. Every comment, every visit, every small erosion. Tamsin took notes on her phone. "Here's what I want you to do," she said when I finished. "I want you to call your attorney. Not a general one, an estate attorney. Do you have one?" My husband and I had done our wills and trust documents with a woman named Patricia, and I realized I could not remember her last name offhand, but I had her card somewhere. "Find that card," Tamsin said. "Call her Monday. Don't wait. And in the meantime," Christopher said, "document everything, every conversation, every text. Do you still have the text from Lee about the family meeting?" I did. It was still on my phone. "Don't delete anything," he said. "I want to be honest with you about something." In those days, I still believed this was a misunderstanding that could be corrected. I still thought Leigh was being manipulated by Connor more than she was a willing participant. I think I needed to believe that, because she is my daughter. But I was just beginning, to look at the evidence more honestly. The text started 2 weeks later. Not from Leigh. From Connor directly. That was new. Connor had never texted me before, not once in 17 years of being my son-in-law. He always went through Leigh. The first text was friendly. "Hi, June. Just following up on our conversation. Wanted to share some info on the Pines if you're open to it. No pressure." I showed it to Christopher. "He's going around Lee now," Christopher said. "That's deliberate." "Why?" "Because he knows Lee has emotions about this, and emotions slow things down. He wants to move faster than she will." The second text came 3 days later. "June, I spoke with a colleague in real estate, and the market may be softening. Might be worth acting sooner rather than later if you're considering options. Creating urgency." I recognized it. I'd seen it in timeshare presentations my husband and I once sat through in Myrtle Beach. The third text, and this is the one that changed things for me, came on a Sunday evening. "June, I think we should talk directly. There are some concerns about your ability to maintain the property long term. I'd like to discuss some options that could benefit everyone. Concerns about your ability to maintain the property." I read that sentence 4 times. I called Christopher. "He just threatened me," I said. Christopher was quiet for a moment. "Yeah, he did. Are you okay?" "I'm angry." "Good," he said. "Stay angry. It'll keep you focused." I did not respond to the text. I forwarded it to my attorney, whose last name I had found, Hollywell, Patricia Hollywell, of Hollywell and Crane in downtown Asheville. I had met with her the week before. She had looked at my trust documents and my deed and the texts, and she had said, very calmly, "June, you are in a stronger position than you may realize. I want to tell you about my neighbor, Bev. Bev is 72, and she has lived next door to me for 19 years. Her husband Frank passed 2 years before mine did, and in the year after both our husbands were gone, we developed the habit of having coffee on my porch on Saturday mornings. She brings the good creamer, the kind with real cream, and I make the biscuits, and we sit and talk until noon. Bev is not a dramatic person. She is steady and funny, and she notices everything. In April, Bev called me. "Your son-in-law was driving by the house slowly yesterday," she said. "Twice, while you were at the grocery store. He stopped the second time and got out and walked up to look at the foundation on the east side." I gripped the phone. "Did he see you watching?" "No," Bev said. "I was inside, but I know that man's truck." I called Patricia Hollywell the next morning. "That doesn't constitute trespassing," she said. "The walkway is accessible. But I want you to document it. Date, time, what Bev observed. And I'd like you to look into a security camera system for the exterior." I had 3 cameras installed by the end of that week. Front door, back door, east side of the house. My nephew, Christopher's son, set them up and showed me how to check the footage on my phone. People had been underestimating me my whole life. I had stopped taking it personally. I had started using it. May was quiet. Too quiet. Lee called me twice. Both times the calls were strained, surface level. She asked about my garden. I told her the tomatoes were coming in early. She asked if I was doing okay. I said I was fine. Neither of us mentioned Connor, the meeting, the texts. It was like we were both holding our breath. Maisie's dance recital was the third Saturday in May. I went. I sat 3 rows behind Lee and Connor, and I watched my granddaughter dance to a Dolly Parton song. And I clapped until my hands hurt, and I did not let any of it, not Connor, not any of it, take that moment from me. After the recital in the parking lot, Connor approached me. Lee was corralling the kids toward the car. "June," he said, "I think we got off on the wrong foot." I looked at him. "I want you to know that everything I said came from a place of genuine concern. For you, for the family." I kept my face neutral. I had practiced this too, in the mirror, the same way I used to practice classroom composure. "I appreciate that, Connor. I just think there's a version of this where everybody benefits." I said, "I'd love to have a fresh conversation, just the 4 of us, maybe at your place, so you're comfortable." "I'll think about it," I said. I got in my car. I drove to the end of the parking lot. I sat for a moment, and then I took out my phone and I made a note of exactly what he had said, word for word, with the time and date. He wanted to come to my house. He wanted to see it again. Be inside it. Make his case on my ground. I understood exactly what he was doing. And I had just decided exactly what I was going to do. I called Patricia that evening. "He wants to come to my house," I said. "And what do you want to do?" "I want to let him." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Tell me more." I told her my idea. She listened without interrupting, which is something I have always appreciated in a good listener. She lets you get to the end before she responds. When I finished, she said, "That can work, but you need to be very careful about the documentation. Everything on your end needs to be clean and clear." "I know," I said. "And June, are you sure you want to do this? Once you do, there's no going back to pretending." "There's already no going back," I said. "I just want to make sure I'm the one who ends it." I called Lee. I told her Connor had mentioned a fresh conversation and that I was open to it, if she was comfortable. Lee sounded relieved in the way that people sound relieved when they've been carrying something heavy and someone offers to set it down. They came on a Saturday evening in June. I made iced tea and lemon pound cake. I set the table nicely. I wore my blue dress, the one my husband always said made me look steady, and I placed the small digital recorder on the bookshelf behind me, which Patricia had confirmed was legal under North Carolina law, which is a one-party consent state. I only needed to consent for myself. They came in. Connor shook my hand. Lee hugged me, a real hug this time, tighter, and for a moment I felt the daughter I knew in my arms, and I almost lost my nerve. Almost. We sat in the living room. Connor leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, which is how he sits when he's being persuasive. He had rehearsed again, I could tell. He talked about property values, about equity, about my quality of life, about how this stage of life requires different considerations. He talked about how they could structure a purchase. They would buy my house from me, below market, but I would receive guaranteed monthly payments, which would be more reliable than trying to manage everything yourself. He wanted to buy my house, below market value, on a payment plan he controlled. I let him finish. I took a sip of iced tea. "Connor," I said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When you walked around the east side of my house in April, what were you looking at?" The color left his face. I was just in the neighborhood." "You drove by twice and parked and examined the foundation. A neighbor saw you." Lee turned to look at him. It was nothing. I was curious." "You were assessing it," I said. "You've been assessing this house for a long time, the same way you assess the properties you buy." I kept my voice the same as always. "Room temperature. I want you to know that I have spoken with my estate attorney. My house is in a living trust. It cannot be transferred by any means other than my own explicit, witnessed, notarized consent. My financial accounts are similarly protected. I have documented every conversation, every text message, and every visit, including the April visit, and that documentation is on file with my attorney. The room was extremely quiet. Mom, Lee said. I love you, I said, and I meant it completely. I love you and I love Maisie and Owen more than anything in this world. But I need you to hear me say this clearly, in this room, with your husband present. I looked at her steadily. I am not going to the Pines at Crest Ridge. I am not selling this house. I am not signing anything. And if there is one more text, one more visit, one more conversation about my property that I have not invited, I will not be calling you. I will be calling my attorney. Connor stood up. He said something about being misunderstood, and I let him say it. Lee sat very still. I think you should go home now, I said. He went first. Lee paused in the doorway. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't entirely read, part shame, part something else. Something younger. Mom, she said, the house in Crest Ridge, the Pines. She stopped. He put a deposit down already, 2 months ago. I looked at her. He was that sure, she said quietly. Then she walked out. I stood in my living room for a long time after they left. The pound cake was still on the table, barely touched. Outside, through the window, the last light was going pink over the yard, my garden, coming up full and green. The chair on the back porch where my husband used to sit. I picked up the recorder from the bookshelf. I pressed stop. I set it on the table next to the untouched pound cake. Then I called Christopher. How did it go? He said. It's done, I said. I will tell you what happened after, because I know you want to know. Connor and Lee's marriage. I found out through a roundabout way, through Bev, who heard from someone at church, had been under significant strain for over a year. The deposit on the Pines at Crest Ridge was part of a larger financial picture that Lee had not been fully informed about. Connor had made several bad investments. He needed equity. He had been looking at my house the way a drowning man looks at something to grab onto. When the plan collapsed, so did some things between them. They are still together, as of now, but something shifted and Lee knows it, and I think on some level she had known for longer than she admitted to herself. Lee called me 6 weeks after that evening. She asked if she could come over alone. She came on a Wednesday morning and I made coffee and we sat on the porch, and she cried for about 20 minutes without saying much, and I handed her tissues and didn't try to fill the silence. When she was done, she said, I'm sorry, Mom. I should have stopped it sooner. You're here now, I said. Is that enough? I thought about my husband. I thought about the lavender purple bedroom. I thought about 9 years of Tuesday dance practices and 14 hours of labor and all the 1,000 ordinary things that make a person yours. It's a start, I said. She nodded. She looked out at the dogwood tree. Can I bring the kids Sunday? She said. Owen's been asking about your biscuits. Tell him I'll make a double batch, I said. Here's what I want you to take away from this. If you're watching and something I've said sounds familiar, not because your situation is exactly like mine, it isn't. Everyone's is different, but because the feeling might be similar. The feeling of being slowly, politely, reasonably managed, of being spoken to in the language of concern when the real language is something else. You are allowed to know the difference. You are allowed to be 68 and sharp and prepared and unwilling. You are allowed to have an estate attorney and a digital recorder and a neighbor who notices things and a son who gets on a plane. You are allowed to set the pound cake on the table and pour the iced tea and look across the room at someone who underestimated you and let them find out, quietly, that they were wrong. Get your documents in order. Know what you own. Trust what you notice. And if someone tries to make you feel like your own life is too much for you to handle, you can smile and hand them nothing and show them to the door. This is still my house. It always was. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since that evening in June. Not in any grand or abstract way, just the plain, ordinary version of it that plays out in real lives between real people. Connor spent months building a plan. He made calculations, sent texts, drove slowly past my house, put a deposit on a place he intended to move me into. He was thorough. He worked hard at it, and none of it worked, not because of luck or fate, but because the plan had a flaw built into it from the start. He decided what I was before he knew who I was. That's the part I keep coming back to. He looked at a 68-year-old widow living alone in a 4-bedroom house, and he saw an opportunity. He didn't see 31 years of teaching children how to think. He didn't see a woman who had watched her husband die and rebuilt her daily life from the ground up and came out of it steadier than before. He saw a category: elderly woman, probably confused, probably manageable. And he acted on that assumption as if it were fact. That's not cruelty exactly. It's a failure of attention. And failures of attention have consequences. What I did wasn't revenge. I want to be clear about that. I didn't set out to humiliate anyone or win anything. I set out to protect what was mine, and to do it cleanly and legally and without losing myself in the process. Every step I took, calling Patricia, installing the cameras, keeping records, letting Connor walk into that living room, was just preparation meeting its moment. I had been a teacher for 3 decades. I understood that you cannot control what other people do. You can only control how prepared you are when they do it. The harder thing, the thing I'm still working through, is Lee. Because Connor is easy to understand. He wanted something, and he tried to take it. But Lee is my daughter, and she knew. Not everything, maybe, but enough. She knew the deposit had been placed before I agreed to anything. She came into that house carrying that knowledge, and she sat across from me and she let the conversation happen anyway. That is the part that required something more from me than preparation. That required a choice afterward about what kind of mother I intended to keep being. I chose to let her come back. Not because what she did was small, it wasn't, but because I know my daughter, and I know that people caught between the person they love and the person they've become can lose their way for a while without losing themselves permanently. I've seen it in children. I've seen it in adults. The question is always what they do when they find their footing again. Lee cried on my porch and she said she should have stopped it sooner. That's not nothing. That's actually the beginning of something. I'm not naive about what it cost me either. Trust is not a light switch. You don't flip it back on because someone apologizes. But you can decide to stay at the table, to watch and see, to give the relationship room to become something honest again. That's not weakness. That's the longest kind of courage there is. What I want, if you're somewhere in the story, if you recognize the polite pressure, the reasonable sounding language, the slow accumulation of small moments that add up to something that doesn't feel right, is for you to trust that recognition. Not to panic, not to burn everything down, but to get your documents in order, to find your Patricia Hollywell, to call your Christopher, to let your Bev next door know that you notice things too. Preparation is not paranoia. It is self-respect made practical. This is still my house. Owen got his double batch of biscuits. The dogwood bloomed again this spring. That's enough. That's everything.